You may have come across my next guest when she wrote a powerful book called Dead Aid, which argued that overseas aid actually makes poverty worse in developing countries, not better. Now she's out with a new book arguing that the ruling elites everywhere have lost the people's trust and she's got a plan to fix it. Here she is, one of the world's top economists, Dr. Dambisa Moyo, author of Edge of Chaos, Why Democracy is Failing to Deliver Economic Growth and How to Fix It. Dambisa, thank you so much for joining us. I really am excited to talk to you.
Thank you.
I think your book is one of those things where most people will look at it and say, well, some of these ideas are brilliant and some are completely crazy. And to me, that is the sign of a really interesting, provocative argument. So first of all, just tell us what the argument is, and then perhaps we can look at some of your specific ideas.
Sure. So the book is essentially in two parts. The first part lays out what I see are 6 key massive economic headwinds that are threatening to upend the global economy. These are all long-term, deeply entrenched, intergenerational challenges, things like demographic shifts, income inequality issues, worries about the amount of debt we're carrying, and of course technology and the jobless underclass and the risks that come from there. But it's also about the fact that we have short-termism deeply embedded in liberal democracies. We have elections ever so often, and this creates a schism or a mismatch between long-term economic problems and short-term challenges. And essentially what the book is trying to do is to propose a reform that targets the 2 key aspects of the weaknesses in democracy today. One is around legitimacy, which you touched on in the introductory remarks that you had this evening, but also the second bit around myopia, and try to get policymakers focused on these deeply important issues.
So what's interesting about that, I think, and I haven't really heard this from put together so well as you have, is you've got these economic problems that we talk about a lot. And you're saying that the answer is not necessarily economic policy, that may be part of it, but it's actually reforms to democracy.
Absolutely.
The way democracy works is the real priority for solving the economic problems. Just give us some of the specific ideas for improving democracy that you would put near the top of your list.
So, Steve, it's a great question because I was really critically focused on making sure we have a menu of options. And what's critically important to mention here is that all 10 of the proposals that I offer in the book to reform democracy do exist in precedent around the world today. So as much as some people might roll their eyes and say this is impossible, they actually exist. Things like extending political terms or actually trying to encourage more voter engagement and ensuring that we have minimum standards for politicians. But also it's about increasing, not decreasing, increasing the pay to politicians, but also ensuring that they justify that compensation by us being able to focus on the outputs and outcomes in the economy.
So that one was interesting. You talk about literally performance-related pay.
Yes.
For politicians and those in government.
Absolutely.
How can that work?
Well, it works. It already works in Singapore. As you may be aware, the head of state in Singapore earns about $1.4 million a year. But what I think is more interesting is that the cabinet officials, so the Secretary of State and Foreign Affairs and Treasury, etc., they each earn 30 to 40% bonuses depending on how the economy performs. Things like what the GDP outcome looks like, if inflation is low, but also living standard improvements, life expectancy, etc. But there's also embedded in that this idea of a clawback. So if there is a lack of performance that's revealed later on, you're able to claw back from the pensions of these politicians. And frankly, I mean, it may seem kind of crazy, but the truth of the matter is that we've already seen significant innovation and reforms in private compensation. So I don't see why we shouldn't see that sort of thing also in public space.
All right, Rayhan, how about that? Performance-related pay for politicians. You think people, I think, want them to be paid less, not more. But if they deliver the results, what's wrong with it?
I think that Dambisa is doing a brilliant job of provoking people, of getting them to think hard about how do we need to structurally change our democracy. If 2016 taught us anything, it is that there is a deep well of discontent. And unless we start thinking more creatively and just stop shooting down every single new kind of provocative, zany-seeming idea, we're not going to make any progress. So I applaud her for that. As to how performance pay would work in practice, I would be very open to experimenting with it, certainly.
Okay. So, Katrina, one of the other ideas that caught my eye in Dambisa's book was doing something to deal with the problem of the career politicians who never do anything else, never do anything in the real world, never understand how to create jobs or whatever, and seem to sort of get into all the different offices and get elected, and just all they ever do is politics. She's talking about requiring real-world experience, as we see, of course, with President Trump. But, I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's great, and I agree. It's definitely thought-provoking. I don't agree so much with the idea of a civics test and meeting a certain standard. I mean, we have Harvard and Yale graduates crawling all over Washington, D.C., and they've pretty much run the place into the ground. But it's definitely something to think about and consider. And with regard to the electorate, you know, I noticed that one of the things she focused on was having an uninformed electorate.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the biggest problem, because when we have career politicians, because our electorate isn't very informed on what they're doing.
Right.
But I think that's more of a dysfunction in having just a two-party system that has essentially made laws protecting the incumbency than it is on democracy in and of its whole. I mean, the people are truly in control of our country. It's just that we have made it as such people aren't aware of what's going on. I think the parties like it that way.
Well, just if I may, I mean, I think Katrina makes a really important point about the extent to which a two-party duopoly engages in incumbent protection. Almost whenever you see a campaign finance reform, it is generally something that is designed to make things better for incumbents and tougher for challengers. This is basically a kind of cartel. And I think that if you're really thinking about stabilizing democracy, broadening democracy, you've got to think about all of these folks who feel unrepresented in the system as it exists. There are a lot of folks in the heartland who feel that way, but also there are folks in the cities
because it's such a. But I want to make sure we get a last word from Dambisa. Any kind of quick responses on what the panel have said, or anything you want to get across?
Just the critical point I would stress here is that the weighted voting system that that was mentioned a moment ago is not about education, and this is a salient point. It do not conflate knowledge and understanding and engagement, which we want from voters, with education. It's not about having a degree. It's not about having gone to Harvard or Yale. It's about ensuring that our voters actually know what they're engaged, what the civics aspects of society are, how the system works, and what the key aspects of the main issues on the ballot are.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. More in the book, Edge of Chaos. Thank you so much for joining us.